I think from where I am, I have this really good opportunity to highlight the job guarantee, because I live in an area that was directly impacted by the job guarantees of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Southeastern Washington State is basically a desert. We just happen to live next to a huge Columbia River, which is the border between Washington and Oregon. And they built the Grand Coulee Dam, which was at the time, it was the largest cement structure in the world. They built the Bonneville Dam. They built dams along the Snake River, the Columbia, and they irrigated the desert. I mean, Washington State produces like over 300 different products, so, produce. So, we help feed the nation, and that's all due to the job guarantee.
Welcome to Activist MMT, a podcast about nonviolent MMT direct activism, introducing modern monetary theory to the world, and conversations about learning MMT together. I'm your host, Jeff Epstein. Today I talk with fourth-year MMT activist and nurse, Amber Griego. Amber is a co-founder of an organization called Beyond the Spectrum, or BTS. BTS produces a short weekly video highlighting important and influential tweets regarding modern money theory written by academics and lay people alike. I'm happy to have been included in several of their videos since they began in January 2020. Amber grew up and still lives in a highly conservative part of Washington State, despite personally having strong progressive views. She was homeschooled, and even though she says there are large swaths missing from her education, she still graduated with honors after taking the Washington State exams. Just as I was, Amber was politically woken up by Bernie Sanders in 2015. In addition, because one of those missing swaths happened to be economics, discovering modern money in 2017 was a relatively quick and painless transition. Her breakthrough came from Rocco Million, who at the time did regular live streams for the online activism group Real Progressives. Amber considers kindness to be of paramount importance, which is partially influenced by her experience as a nurse, sitting at the deathbeds of hundreds of elderly patients and witnessing the last breath of many. Just as different styles of patients prefer different styles of nurses, different styles of listeners and learners prefer different styles of speakers and teachers. Despite being told by some so-called allies that kindness won't get you far, the truth is that all styles are needed. When you are presented with someone you can't reach, your job is to pass them off to someone else with a more appropriate style for that person. Finally, Amber's geographical region was particularly affected by the job guarantee, or more specifically, the New Deal. Her area was originally a desert, but in the 1930s and 40s was permanently transformed into what is now called the land of 1,000 wineries. It is currently under the management of the Army Corps of Engineers. Although she doesn't consider herself an artist, Amber expresses her learning through memes, videos, and other graphical forms. Some examples of her work can be found in the show notes. You can contact me on Twitter or Facebook, and you can email me at activistmmt@gmail.com. If you're enjoying Activist MMT even a fraction as much as I enjoy creating it, and if you're safe and secure and happen to be lucky enough to have some public deficit kicking around in your pocket, I hope you might consider becoming a monthly patron of Activist MMT. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get exclusive content and updates, several days of early access to every episode, and for some, super early access weeks and sometimes even months in advance. You can start by going to patreon.com/activistmmt. That's Patreon. Whatever you can afford, I would be very grateful. Thank you. Now, on to our conversation. Hi, Amber. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Jeff.
Why don't we just get started? Why don't you please introduce yourself, touch on your cool weekly video that you do, and also your thinking before you ever heard of MMT.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I'm active in a group called Beyond the Spectrum, BTS. And we do a fun weekly review of the interesting tweets in the MMT community, trying to highlight important issues that are going on and highlight important activists who are out there fighting with pen and sword to get this stuff going. I was born and raised here in Washington State with a short 10-year stint in Nevada. Before MMT, I grew up very conservative, although I myself personally am very liberal, left-leaning. I grew up in a conservative evangelical home. And so I grew up with all the money myths that a lot of people grow up with, that taxes fund spending and we're in debt to China, and, the debt is a tax burden on future generations, and on and on and on. So that's kind of, where I started, where a lot of people do. I think that pretty much categorizes the average American in a lot of respects. And so coming up 2015, learning about Bernie, learning about austerity, and not that I didn't know about income inequality, but my life is, kind of removed from that in some respects. And so it was a huge awakening where I think a lot of people did, 2016, Bernie opened the door for a lot of us to different ways of thinking. And then that's when I started hearing Rocco Million, who was with Real Progressives at the time. And the way that he talks really resonated with me. He's a, average guy like I am. And so the way that he explained it, it really made a lot of sense to me, really no nonsense, common sense stuff.
So you heard him around 2015?
Well, no, that's when I started listening to Bernie, and that's when the door started opening up. Because no, I don't think Rocco was I didn't start really hearing him till like 2017, 2018.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it was definitely Bernie was the one that made me question more. Whereas before I had voted for Obama twice, and I was set to, crown Queen Hillary. I was like, oh, well, it's her time. I was one of those. And Bernie really made me question a lot of things. And so that led me to question those money myths that we all grow up with. And then hearing, Rocco's common sense, no nonsense way of putting it. And it was like a revelation, when you go from that money myth to the revelation of, oh my gosh, the government can't afford to do these things. There's just the lack of the political will. I mean, it's an epiphany. It truly was an epiphany for me. I know that I had seen some RP videos during the election. I want to say during the 2016 time, but it was just in passing. And none of it had really clicked for me. I was like, that sounds crazy. If you look back far enough, you could probably find a comment from me saying such. But some people have different approaches. So, just like in nursing, if a patient isn't responding to one nurse, then you send in another nurse, with a different disposition. And it's the same thing with teaching. Rocco just had the message that clicked for me, the way that he explained it.
Yeah, I there are many different kinds of styles. Like, Ellis, on the professional level is like, Ellis is one kind of teacher, Stephanie's another kind of teacher, Stephen Hale's another kind of teacher. And then on the non-professional level, it's like, me and Rocco and Steve and Steve Grumbine and Jeff Ginter, like they're all such different styles of basically the same, obviously sort of almost exactly the same information, but it's like, I agree with you. It's like the different styles of teaching works for different styles of students.
Sure.
You said it was like a real epiphany. What do you remember? Do you recall specifically what that was?
I do. I even remember the first meme I ever made. It's a guy shaking his fists with a light bulb. The way you feel when you realize that taxes don't fund spending. So I have like this graphic representation of my growth and development through MMT, starting out with you start out with just these basic little tidbits of information, but they're really important. They're crucial. They're hinge pins to the policies, or, you're just like an air traffic controller trying to bring people in and direct them to the real gurus who know. I kind of see that as my mission, as far as knowing that there's so much more that I personally need to learn, that it's really important that whatever I'm doing, it's directing people back to the source, which are, our heterodox economists, Stephanie Kelton and Stephen Hale and Fidel Kaboub and, the like. That's a really important factor for me, that I try to stay on the message. The message is what's important. Otherwise, people like me who don't know enough, we'll get drug out into the weeds in some wild goose chase of a conversation because we didn't keep it simple and we didn't remember that it's important to direct these people back where they need to go. So they too can learn. They need to learn the way that we did too. So
what do you mean? What do you mean by back to the way they need to go?
I just meant back to the source. We know enough to have a basic discussion and direct people. Yeah, the experts, that's where it's at.
Yeah, I think I made that mistake quite a few times of trying to get into like expressing what I understood, and then they'll hit me with some, China or debt or whatever, the things that I just had no clue of up until actually pretty recently. Like Joe Firestone. He was the one that, like, teaching me the concept of asset swaps is what all of a sudden, having nothing to do with China, just the Federal Reserve does asset swaps. That is what made me suddenly understand China. It's like if you dare try and you bring up something and then they'll bring up China and then you're stuck because you don't understand it yet. So it's like you have to accumulate those sources from the experts in order to be able to pull them out of your pocket. And that takes a long time to be able to.
Yeah, I agree. And working within, your frame of knowledge, your frame of reference. Otherwise, you can turn people off unintentionally by trying to answer questions that you don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know. That's been a guidepost that I've tried to follow from the beginning, because I don't want to go down that road.
The guidepost of just pointing to the experts is what you mean? Right.
And keeping within my frame of reference. It's just like in nursing. You don't work outside of your skill set. Otherwise, people can get hurt, and it's the same with MMT. We don't want to, turn people away from MMT by false information or putting off an air like we know and we don't know. So it's just, it's important, I think.
So what were some of the sort of milestones in your understanding? Like you said, this epiphany, and you have these memes reflecting your growth.
I guess it would be kind of the accumulation of people that I've met along the way, all the different activists and the different economists. I can remember with glee, getting friend requests accepted from like Stephanie Kelton. It's like a fangirl moment. And you're like, I'm so excited. It's like, who are you? Who gets excited over economists? You're such a dork, But it truly did. It's still to this day, I get excited about it, that because these people are accessible in the fact that they're so willing to answer questions because we have the same goal. We might be separated by years, states, PhDs, we're vastly separated in that respect, but we're the same in that we have the same mission. They're just much better equipped at articulating said mission, So they're kind of like heroes in a lot of ways. They're here to help the betterment of society. We're hurting in an unprecedented way, that we haven't seen in decades. I just see the hard work that they're trying to do following the money. It all comes down to whether or not the government spends that money on the people which is necessary. And they're going to the heart of the matter. And it's such a noble, I can't think of anything more noble.
And they're sort of, have you gone, did you happen to go to any, well, you're pretty far away. Did you happen to go to any of the conferences?
No, I lived vicariously through people like Rocco who were able to go, and Lana Dell, and but no, maybe someday.
Yeah, well, probably not this year.
Yeah, definitely not this year.
Yeah, but yeah, it's like we're the front line and they're the generals behind us. It's they have chosen to fight this battle through social media and blogs because they're not making a substantial difference through the official channels for obvious reasons. So it really is unique, and they really are available to answer questions and accessible and talking briefly behind the scenes and whatever. You said that you still have things to learn. What specific things, do you understand that you're missing or you're interested in pursuing?
Yes, specifically more of the function of the Fed, kind of what you had alluded to with learning with Dr. Joe. That is definitely a dark area. And I should just go back a little bit and say that I have huge empty swaths in my education anyway, in the fact that I homeschooled for high school, and my parents kind of left it up to me what I wanted to study. So I did. I studied what I wanted to. I still graduated on time with honors. So I do have that.
That means you took their exams, I would think.
Right. I did take the Washington State exams, correct. But so, yeah, I there's holes in my education. So that's a benefit in that I didn't have to unlearn some things, but it is a hindrance in that there are some things I don't know. And so, especially when it came to economics. And I think that's part of the reason why it was so interesting to me, because there was a lot of things that I didn't know. But yeah, specifically the function of the Fed, it's supposed to be independent from the Treasury, but then you hear all this talk about, the Trump administration had supposedly closed the independent, something with that. But let's see, other areas of MMT. I don't know much about the world market at all. So when people talk about the devaluing of the dollar, I know that the petrodollar it's not what I grew up thinking, and the fact that, for example, the UK is no longer the world's reserve currency, and their country didn't blow up because of it.
I didn't realize they used to be.
Yeah, the UK used to be the world's reserve currency. I mean, it definitely suffered under austerity during the Margaret Thatcher days and continues, but it wasn't because of its loss of the world reserve currency. So the same thing with America. If God forbid, we did lose that status, our internal country is not going to implode as long as production, is taken care of. And so much of it's been shipped overseas. So I do agree with bringing some of that stuff home for obvious reasons. It's a national security reason.
Bringing what stuff home?
Production. all of the PPE equipment that we fell short on. Essential goods, things that we need. So God forbid something happens, internally our country can make it through, because there's lots of different reasons why exports and imports can stop, not just a virus.
Yeah, it's like the virus, everybody has to take care of themselves. So we can't import anymore, or at least to the fact that manufacturing is going overseas has really harmed us. And that's one of the reasons. Yeah. I get the very basics of petrodollar, but when you talk to someone about the petrodollar, they hit you with things that I'm just like, I think, I don't know the term, foreign trading, foreign exchange. Like I don't really have my head around that, and that's obviously related to the petrodollar. So when that subject comes up, someone who knows the petrodollar well also knows all of these other things of like China owns our debt and all how these other things fit into it. And that's a subject that I don't really have my head around yet.
Right. Like if I'm picturing the sectoral balances in my mind, or if I'm picturing the bathtub, an analogy or whatever, and I could see the different ins and outs and the flows, that is definitely that global import export. I'm with you. I don't I don't understand that particular flow very well.
Yeah, it's like there's so much to learn. You have to choose something, It's like you can't, that's important, but it's like there's all these core concepts to learn. It's just you'll get around to it when you can, in a way. It's like I wanted to say before, you said you got into you discovered Bernie in 2015. He's who sort of started you questioning economic stuff, and I discovered Bernie in August of 2015 as well, August. And he didn't get me questioning economic stuff, but he, just opened my eyes in general. Like I was completely politically asleep before him. I mean, completely. So I got really involved in his campaign. That was the first campaign I'd ever been involved with. But then 2 years later, Jeff Ginter Jeff lives like just an hour away from me. And so I didn't know anything about economics at all. Like I never read about it or followed it or anything at all. Like it just was like, it's not for me. This is for the adults in the room. And then Jeff and I were talking on the phone about just some local politics stuff. And he just said to me out of the blue, you need to understand how the federal economy works. And like you said, you didn't really have a background in economics either. And so you weren't really questioning stuff. Like it came to you easier, I think, than it would for someone that was like confident in their wrong economic education. And I was exactly the same way. I didn't have any background at all. I was like an empty vessel. So instead of like my having difficulty understanding what Jeff was introducing to me, MMT is right. But then you're immediately hit by all of these people of this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And I was just like immediately felt in a defensive position. It was just a really interesting experience. Stephen, in the beginning of Stephen Hale's book, he talks about how economics for sustainable prosperity. He talks about how economics changing is sort of similar to plate tectonics. That geologists, or whatever the field of study is, geologists were saying that this is just how it is, how the continents are, or how it is, even though children were noticing that they sort of fit together like puzzle pieces if you move them around. And it was the same kind of resistance, the same kind of discrimination. But it took like 50 years or something for the people who were right. They were dead at this point, but finally they were justified that the continents actually moved.
Right. And that's a really good point is, we might not see the end result of a lot of these things, but hopefully we will because the Earth's on fire. But we have to push for it anyway, even though, like I said, we might not get the benefit of the results.
Yep. That's a good point. You follow Joe quite a bit?
I do. I love Dr. Joe. I like Stephen Hale. I like his podcast on YouTube. I love Christian Riley and Patricia. I think from where I am, I have this really good opportunity to highlight the job guarantee because I live in an area that was directly impacted by the job guarantees of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. southeastern Washington state is basically a desert. We just happen to live next to a huge Columbia River, which is the border between Washington and Oregon. And they built the Grand Coulee Dam, which was at the time, it was the largest cement structure in the world. They built the Bonneville Dam. They built dams along the Snake River, the Columbia, and they irrigated the desert. I mean, Washington State produces like over 300 different products, so produce. So we help feed the nation, and that's all due to the job guarantee.
And what used to be a desert.
What used to be a desert is now a paradise. We're the land of 1,000 wineries.
So it's like it was built. This was in the New Deal, I would presume.
It was done. They began building it in 1933. It was completed in 1942. It was actually under the Reclamation Project Act of 1939. And it's currently under the control of the Army Corps of Engineers. But it still receives subsidy. It still receives subsidy from the federal government.
But what used to be a desert is now, like, roughly speaking, that like one huge effort 90 years ago has made it into a permanently non-desert, basically.
Yes, it is a permanently irrigated area now. Correct.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. And so I think about the time. Think about the time that was built. During great public upheaval. Social and strife. This was the Great Depression. This was World War II. And look at what they got done. And where we talk about the federal job guarantee today, absolutely it can be locally administered, but there's no reason why we can't do these large infrastructure projects. In fact, we need to. I mean, desperately. So I just see it as such a important opportunity to look at these lessons of the past and see what we've done as a nation and see that we can do that again. Absolutely.
Were you aware of these, the reclamation, the irrigating of the desert, or whatever, the big project to undesert the desert? Were you aware of that, like, before MMT? Or
so my grandparents had one of the very first farms in the area, and this was the first water actually didn't flow till 10 years later. So this would have been late 40s, early 50s when the water actually started flowing. And my family, grandparents, and my father and my mother all worked for the Columbia Basin Irrigation Project. My mother still does to this day. So I've always known about it. I've always known about the history of it, but I had never really paid attention to that important factor until I had learned about modern money and the job guarantee. I mean, it really shows you just what the government can do when the political will is behind it. We absolutely can put people back to work and doing something important for the infrastructure of the country. Not necessarily irrigation, obviously, but there's lots of different projects that could be done as far as building solar farms, wind farms. And we do have a large wind farm center here, but it needs to be expanded. It's not enough.
describe the process of your creating these Beyond the Spectrum videos that you do every week that you've been doing for several months now.
Yes, with the Tweet Review, it's an opportunity to not only highlight our favorite economists, of course, but highlight everyday activists. And not just everyday activists, but also maybe people who are brand new to MMT. Mm-hmm. But they've said something and it makes a lot of sense. It's a good statement. And there's no reason why those people shouldn't be highlighted as well. They're part of this too. We're all in this together. So I see it, like I said, as an opportunity because I think that's really important. We don't want to just be talking to ourselves all the time in an echo chamber. It's really important that we're trying to change minds, every day, everywhere that we go.
So describe, like, I mean, I'm interested in the particular procedures, at least some of the details, like the tools and the meta stuff, but also just like the experience of actually how you guys discovered these things, how you share them with each other, how it ends up coming together.
Sure. Our group's very democratic. We all have input. We all have a say. We all can make any suggestions that we want. It's a very peaceful and cooperative group. So it's definitely a collaborative thing. So anyone in the group can say, "Hey, let's use this tweet." So I'll curate them. I'll try to put them in some kind of a discernible order, because these tweets obviously don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. Then it's try to highlight what's the heart of each tweet. What's very important inside each of these tweets. Mm-hmm. And then try to have some little graphic representation of that sentiment. So it's very much, there's a lot of, heart and soul put into it as far as that goes. That the whole project came about just from our group, talking and discussing and throwing around ideas, and we all feel really good about it. We enjoy what we do, and I do the animations that appear inside the tweet. So anything inside of the tweet is from me. And then she does the graphics that kind of fall on the sides, the intro and the outro. She dresses it up. She's the one that makes it what it is. So
okay.
Not only have I made many graphic memes, I've also made 2 or 3 little MMT educational videos. One of them's 3 minutes long, one of them's 10 minutes long, and one of them's like 16 minutes long. And everything that I've done, as far as those projects go, was done on my phone.
That's awesome. Apple or
Android.
Google.
Android, yeah, Google. But yeah, now with the MM Tweet Review, I have upgraded to the 21st century, and I'm using a laptop.
And same application on your laptop?
Jimmy and Sam and I all use Power Director.
Okay. So what else? With your project or your community, like where you are, talking about conservative at all? Like,
well, my family is definitely still conservative, Trump loving. If I wear a Bernie shirt, in fact, my latest Bernie shirt, on the back it says, the government can afford, public purpose spending, or we can afford infinite war. We can afford public purpose spending. People in this community don't appreciate that. A lot of them, anyway. I remember being stopped at a restaurant by a vet, a Korean War vet, asking me how I felt about, America rebuilding Japan after World War II. And I said, well, we probably could have gotten away without dropping that bomb in the first place, sir.
Wow,
and he didn't.
Nice.
He didn't appreciate that.
What did you think he was trying to communicate?
I think he was trying to make reference to money being wasted in that regard. I'm not completely sure. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to start a public scene, especially I take care of the aged for a living, so I don't want to be seen being mean to somebody's, an elderly person. But
a heart attack.
But like, for example,
spending, I'm out of here.
Yeah. But for example, like my bumper stickers kind of sums up, like I have a 2016 bumper sticker that says Hillary for prison next to my billionaires can't buy Bernie sticker.
Wow. That's not subtle.
No, it's not. It tells you exactly where I stand. But the people around here, all they see is the Hillary for prison, which is good because they'll shake their MAGA hats at me and they're like, yeah, they think I'm on their team or whatever. But
Mm. Oh, interesting. No, I didn't even. I was thinking that you were being even more confrontational, but actually, it's the opposite of what I thought. That like you're actually that's a sort of a common bond in a way that you share with the conservatives.
right, that is something that we share. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huge 180 for me. Like I said, voting for Obama twice, and I was all set. It's Hillary, it's her time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember specifically my parents just getting irate with me. Look into her past, look into her everything associated with her, because I never really
Wow.
questioned it before. I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
When Bill was in office.
Mm-hmm.
I was just excited the gas prices were cheap. I had a car to drive.
Mm-hmm.
But it really made me think, and especially around the time, like I said, when Bernie was making me question more as well. Just this force was, between my parents and this enthusiasm that Bernie was feeding in me. It really did make me question, and I'm completely 180 on the Hillary.
Conservatives, Hillary is seen not as the greatest between pretty much everybody, except unless you're like a centrist person. But what people see as negative in Hillary, I think, could probably be pretty different between a conservative and a progressive, for example. So I'm wondering, like, your parents were right of look into Hillary and what she's done, but I'm wondering how much of what they were telling you was like Pizzagate stuff as opposed to, warmongering and the things she's actually done.
Yeah, and it's kind of I get a cross between the two because my dad's very much Alex Jones,
Oh, there you
the,
go.
the Drudge Report, and then my mom's kind of on the other side where she's more reasonable, you know. But we run the gambit in my family. We really do.
Well, so what are their thoughts with your MMT? Like, how much does that communication come up between them? How are they with that?
I don't know. I'm not so much worried about convincing, necessarily my family as I am just continuing forward with the work, highlighting what I can, where I can, when I can, and just keep going one day at a time.
But they realize, even though you're not necessarily teaching them, but just to make it clear who you are, like they understand.
Yeah. Oh, they know for sure. I even have a MMT T-shirt. It's a blackboard MMT 101 listing. USA is a sovereign nation. All federal spending is by decree. Federal taxes don't fund spending. It's
Wow.
one of my favorite T-shirts.
Wow. I would love to see a picture of that.
Sure. Yeah, I could definitely send you the graphic.
Yeah, please do.
I think it's important to try to focus locally. I mean, we're all focused obviously on the federal level. That's where the money's at. That's where the public purse is at. But we also have to think about convincing our people in our local government, people in our local city councils, friends and neighbors. And that's a tall order. Like I said, living on the conservative side of the state. But, I've lived here all my life, and I find that wearing a T-shirt is a really unintrusive way to make that kind of a statement. I'd like to see more MMT bumper stickers, things like that.
That's a good point.
Get it out into the zeitgeist. Make it more commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't ever remember seeing or hearing this stuff, but until a few years ago.
So, who are the people that you like? I'm curious. Who are the people that actually you communicate with? What are some of the experiences that you've had, whether they're successful or not, of actually trying to, make a difference with the people that you want to make a difference with?
Well, locally here, we have a pretty good sized libertarian party. Our mayor is libertarian. So there's a lot
I
of.
don't understand how a libertarian can even be in office. That's sort of like paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, he's also our local pot store owner.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
but as you probably know, the libertarian ideals and concepts do not mesh very well with modern money, especially with taxation.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you even bring up taxation, all they want to talk about is, theft. It's theft. It's theft.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's hard to get a conversation going with these people. But I have friends who are local business owners, and I've tried to impress upon them that running a business is well and good. You're a currency user, just like I am, just like a household, but that doesn't always equate to the federal government. And it's really important that you understand that. As a matter of fact, one of our local restaurant owners is considering running for governor. And that was one of
Hmm.
the first things that I told him. I said, I would probably vote for you, but after a very lengthy discussion about federal finance, and its role
Nice.
in state budgets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's MMT's completely changed, how I talk and interact, with friends, family, the public, but always with kindness. My big thing is kindness, and I've been ridiculed for that inside the MMT community. I've been told that not that it's unimportant, but that it's not going to get me anywhere. And I kind of carry that as a mantle. It's really important to me. I think kindness can actually take you very far.
I think that's awful to be told that kindness is not going to get you very far. I think that's awful. There's nothing wrong necessarily with, what? There is something wrong. What's wrong with it is that there's nothing wrong with someone wanting to have a more gruff style. There's nothing wrong with, I feel personally like not being kind is not going to get me anywhere because I talk to people that really need to be, the idea needs to be rammed through because kindness is not going to work for them. Because that's listening to your audience. That's teaching in a style that will be heard by your audience. But I think you and me, we're not going to try and teach those people. Like, you're not going to try and go out to people who require you to not be kind. I think that's fair to say, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just wish those people well. I mean, I run into people like that all the time. People that, aren't receptive. So, and you wish them well. I literally will tell them to have a super day.
Or you pass them on,
Because,
or you pass them on to someone who has a style that maybe will work for them better, right? Like, those people that are, what I have a problem with is that, yeah, fine, that style might work for you. And that as a teacher, and I know teacher is a little controversial in the activist community to say the word teacher, but you know what I mean. And that more aggressive may also work for that student, for that person who you're trying to reach. That's fine for you. But then to go to someone else and say that your style is wrong, to try and discourage you from being who you naturally are and want to be and strive to be.
yeah, no, I agree. And I try not to tone police people. It's not that I would ever try to do that. I live and let live. But for me in my heart, I take care of the aged. I have sat at hundreds of deathbeds. I watch people take their last breaths sometimes. So my spirituality and who I am is very centered, and there is enough pain in the world that I choose to fill it with kindness, because that's what I would want.
And that's great. And it's exactly what, I'm sure in somewhat of a different way, but I am totally with that philosophy as well. Like the person whose online behavior I strive towards is Sam Levy. Like the way that the deficit owls, do you know who he is?
I do. Yeah, Sam's very funny. Yeah.
The way that he behaves online, that's what I strive towards. Like he's he's a human being and I'm sure he's ruffled, but in that persona, he just doesn't get ruffled. He always, keeps his eye on the ball and doesn't take insults and so on. And he just answers the question, which is important because you're not just trying to communicate in an online conversation. You're not just trying to communicate to that person. In fact, probably more often than not, you're not trying to communicate with that person. You're communicating with everybody else who watches that conversation then and in the future. So, I mean, he basically has that philosophy as well, as my interpretation anyway. And I definitely that's really the kind of people that I choose to be with. Not just, I choose to be with the kind of people that have my same kind of style. At the same time, those people with a more aggressive style or just a different style, we're a good team. Overall, we're a good team. It's all necessary in a way.
That's one thing that I've been thinking about, and I'm not good at, is trying to make MMT concepts, giving more real world examples, things that you could explain to someone and they could say, oh, I get that because that applies to my life too. That is one thing that we've been discussing in BTS, is finding a more common sense approach to, and more, like I said, examples that people would recognize in their own lives. Like, me explaining my community and the job guarantee, that's one example. That's one example I could point to, like my neighbors or, someone in my community. And I could say, look at this here. We've already done this. We've done this before and we can do it again. But I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it coming up with these concepts, but I think that's an important aspect.
It seems like you already did. I mean, the fact that it used to be a desert and the job guarantee made it permanently not a desert is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
Either know the history or experience the history.
Or they don't even realize what FDR did during that time as far as building the infrastructure up. And I think some of the conservatives, I think they know, but, they would never want to give an attaboy to FDR. But yeah, no, I think that's because MMT, modern money, can be so academic, which is great. I mean, I'm a very nerdy person. I'm a dork. I love academic stuff, but not everybody necessarily finds that palatable, or they just can't relate to it. Finding a way to make the material more relatable in a real world setting.
Making your area not a desert is the reality for those conservatives. So instead of talking about MMT necessarily, just get into the history of that project. And then eventually it'll become clear that, that it was part of the New Deal. And then that
this area wasn't the only place that had a massive irrigation project. There was 16 or 17 of them across the country during the same time period. So there's many places where people could point and say, my area directly benefited from a job guarantee.
Okay. So is there, what else would you like to get out before we stop?
I think I would just say that modern money has really helped give me hope, whereas I think I was more, not complacent, but more resigned. Maybe it was because I was partially asleep. That could be it. But I overall feel more hope, whereas in 2016, I was devastated when Bernie lost, and with Bernie dropping out now, I'm in a much more emotionally stable place. I mean, of course, it's heartbreaking and it is disheartening, but I'm still filled with so much more hope, knowing that the policymakers are being influenced by, wonderful people, like Dr. Kelton and Andres Bernal and, Robert Hockett. Conversations that we never would have had, 3 or 4 years ago are in the mainstream. And yes, the world is burning, but I feel like we have some kind of a chance if we keep going. But we have to keep going.
Okay. Thank you so much for talking.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to share some of my thoughts and feelings and my journey through modern money. And I'm so happy that we were able to do this today. I'm really thankful.
Oh, good. I will see you back online. I'll see you back in the comments for Joe Firestone. And thank you so much for talking.
All right. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Today I talk with fourth-year MMT activist and nurse Amber Griego. Amber is a co-founder of an organization called Beyond the Spectrum, or BTS. BTS produces a short weekly video highlighting important and influential tweets regarding modern money theory written by academics and lay people alike. I'm happy to have been included in several of their videos since they began in January 2020. Amber grew up and still lives in a highly conservative part of Washington state, despite personally having strong progressive views. She was homeschooled, and even though she says there are large swaths missing from her education, she still graduated with honors after taking the Washington state exams. Just as I was, Amber was politically woken up by Bernie Sanders in 2015. In addition, because one of those missing swaths happened to be economics, discovering modern money in 2017 was a relatively quick and painless transition. Her breakthrough came from Rocco Million, who at the time did regular live streams for the online activism group Real Progressives. Amber considers kindness, to be of paramount importance, which is partially influenced by her experience as a nurse, sitting at the deathbeds of hundreds of elderly patients and witnessing the last breath of many. Just as different styles of patients prefer different styles of nurses, different styles of listeners and learners prefer different styles of speakers and teachers. Despite being told by some so-called allies that kindness won't get you far, the truth is that all styles are needed. When you are presented with someone you can't reach, your job is to pass them off to someone else with a more appropriate style for that person. Finally, Amber's geographical region was particularly affected by the job guarantee, or more specifically, the New Deal. Her area was originally a desert, but in the 1930s and 40s was permanently transformed into what is now called the land of 1,000 wineries. It is currently under the management of the Army Corps of Engineers. Although she doesn't consider herself an artist, Amber expresses her learning through memes, videos, and other graphical forms. Some examples of her work can be found in the show notes.